forest products. The Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service calls them special forest products, and there are other names as well. We'll go into those in a second. But these are naturally occurring, mostly biological based plants on the landscape or animals. And sometimes they're cultivated, but most of the time they're naturally occurring. They're not timber based. In other words, they're not based on the trunk of the tree. Could be byproducts from trees, but they're not based on the trunk of the tree. The trees I showed you earlier, of course, we're making products from the bole of the tree, the trunk of the tree. So they're not timber, but they can be from wood. Basically, they're biological products from the forest. As I mentioned earlier, there could be specialty forest products that the U.S. Forest Service is, or non-wood forest products. But it's interesting that in other parts of the world, in India and Asia, they call them minor forest products. Well, they're not really minor forest products. They're quite major, especially in their value. We're also talking a bit now about the values you get from the landscape. These are emerging as being very important. And agritourism is one value that we talked about a lot recently. Somebody needs to turn their volume off. I guess their microphone off.
That was me. Sorry, Everett pushed the buttons.
Okay, no problem, Sarah.
I apologize, Tom and everybody.
That's okay.
This is Sarah. I'm with Future Generations University, and my toddler sometimes sits in on evening sessions. So sorry, y'all.
No worries at all. That's great. So getting back to this, why would we consider non-timber forest products in a sugar bush? I think it's a pretty important topic for me anyway, because I've been this big part of my career, and I think, my bias is that we should, okay? Well, here are some reasons why. These products, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, can provide additional income sources, and they can provide this income in other seasons. Besides the season of sugaring, you can provide some income from your landscape through these other non-timber forest products at other times of the year. I think that's very important. Another key aspect of this, several of these products are edible. They have nutritional value. Okay, so they're not. It's important to you maybe provide some food or supplement your diet, but also provide obviously food products for others. And we'll talk about those in a second as well. The other thing I think is very interesting is we're really continuing a regional tradition, a heritage of collecting and using these products on the landscape. And we've kind of gotten away from that in the last couple generations. But years ago, Native Americans and the settlers here, they depended heavily on the landscape for a multitude of products, not just timber, for building homes or producing firewood, but they also produced many other products from the landscape. Another really neat thing about non-timber forest products is it raises awareness about the landscape itself. It helps encourage good land management. Covering the landscape, the understory with plants, helps with erosion control, and it provides ecosystem services such as water. That's a service from the landscape. So, if you have a healthier landscape, especially the understory, your land's going to be better, and you won't have erosion, you won't have runoff, and you certainly would be able to have water and other resources. It's been shown that if you keep the landscape covered with vegetation, that the land itself would be much more productive, but also there'll be more water to share, to use for other aspects of your farm or your landscape. We've also know that these non-timber forest products can be planted or managed among sugar maples, but also other sap producing species, so in the understory. And as I mentioned earlier, these are activities, something you can do during the off season, before or after sugaring. So it's not just the income and not just the income that you produce during the season, but it's also an activity that you could do. And getting back to the comment I made quickly earlier about agritourism and bringing people onto your land, this will be very important because you could show people what you're doing during other periods of the year. You wouldn't meet just the 6 weeks or 8 weeks of the maple syrup program. So there's lots of points that could be raised here. So considering non-timber forest products in sugar bush can add a lot of value to your landscape and have many benefits. Another thing is this area of the world is quite diverse. We're blessed with biodiversity here. Each of the coves and hollers that we know, the valleys and whatnot, has sometimes its own distinct ecological footprint. And so we can take advantage of this diversity by using some of the other plants and for products or services that you could provide on the landscape. Another thing that's been shown is that if you increase the value of the landscape, that will help conserve forests. Well, that seems a little strange, but really, if people value what's on the landscape more totally, then they're going to take better care of that landscape. So there's some other intangible benefits of having non-timber forest products. A nice thing about NTFPs is it diversifies your portfolio, so to speak. You're making an investment in your landscape, growing trees. Well, this will help diversify your portfolio. It's really a type of insurance. If timber prices drop, or as we're having now with the ash trees, we're having emerald ash borer and some other things come into play with your landscape, especially the timber side. Then you got some other opportunities here to make income or provide livelihood. The other thing is that non-timber forest products actually offer opportunity to be really high value products. There's some of them that are quite high, and I'm sure you've heard of ginseng and some of the others. Well, there are several non-timber forest products that are really quite high value. So here we are. We got this sugar bush, and we 6 weeks of the year we use it for, or 8 weeks of the year we use it to make maple syrup. What else can we do with this landscape? And that's where we are tonight. And then some of the landowners I've been working with have been thinning their trees and opening it up a little bit for better sap production and higher sugar content in their sap. And they're opening up areas underneath the trees where they can do other things. And we'll talk about a couple examples of that a little bit later. So here you are in your maple sugar bush. What can you do with them? You can do it just like I alluded to. This is a landowner in Highland County. Some of you may know Giles. We've been working with her for 3 or 4 years, and we've been planting some non-timber forest products there. And it just offers her some alternative crops and income. And we'll talk a little bit more about her sugar bush in a little while. But non-timber forest products, there's a range of them. And let's talk about some of those products now. See if we can get some ideas that you might want to try. We're going to use the forest. We're going to define, we've talked about the use of the forest. We're going to define these non-timber forest products. We can have some linkage with maple syrup production, certainly through the forest side. Most importantly, we're going to talk a little bit about, as I said earlier, about assistance. And then I want to open up a dialogue with you about your possibilities with non-timber forest products. So let's go explore some of these products, and then hopefully get some discussion going about what might be possible in your landscape. Again, I talked about the diversity. Non-timber forest products is really reflects the diversity in this area. Different zones in our region. It's quite diverse, and U.S. Forest Service and others have really alluded to this in some of their publications. It's very important that we understand that this area of the world can really produce a wide variety of products. I mentioned earlier, there's a long history of use here. We've got lots of people, writing about this. Now we're studying it. We've got people looking at it from a cultural standpoint. We lost a lot of that. We're getting it back, but we lost a lot of that. And some of this pre-colonial culture that was here depended highly on the forest. It was very important for Virginia and other states in the region because these crops, these non-timber forest products, were highly desired overseas. one of my first positions as industrial forester was to maintain a naval stores operation. It's basically tapping pine trees for the sap. And the sap is used to make many products. And in the 1600s, it was needed overseas to keep the ships afloat, and chinking the ships. So there's lots of history behind the non-timber forest products. So it's not just about the trees, and it's what I think is, and most people have looked at this over the years, is a great complement to your timber crops. And we know that there are large and growing markets. So these are some reasons why you, as a landowner, might be interested in trying non-timber forest product on your landscape. In fact, West Virginia has a big history of non-timber forest products, and they've spent quite a bit of time and energy and money to help promote the products from West Virginia. If anybody's been to Tamarack, it's quite a display there of locally made products made within West Virginia, and many of them are non-timber forest products. In fact, they have quite a good selection of maple products there as well. So if you haven't been to Tamarack, it's right on the interstate. If you happen to be in the area, it's worth a stop and look at it. It's a great showcase of non-timber forest products. In this case, these are baskets made in a traditional way. Some of them are made from imported materials, but this is a lot of these are traditional designs. You know, I promised to show you a couple of international examples. You know, non-timber forest products have a global trade. We'll talk about some of these a little bit later. One of the key things is rubber. Rubber is highly desired. We use rubber products every day in many parts of our lives, and it's widely traded. And it comes from tapping trees. It's a non-timber forest product, but highly industrialized. Anybody guess what this is? I always stump my classes when I show them this. This is cork. It's stripped from the trees. Once every 10 years, they take the bark from the tree, first 6 or 7 feet, and then they're stacking it to dry, and then they'll make cork stoppers and all sorts of other products, flooring and insulation, even clothing. And it's widely traded. And it only comes from 3 or 4 countries in the world around the Mediterranean. So you've got lots of products going back and forth across the ocean. And we have some right here, the ginseng and the other crops that we can grow in West Virginia and the surrounding states can be traded quite widely around the world. What makes them unique? Well, they're renewable. That's a key thing. They just keep coming back if you take care of them. They're usually harvested in small quantities. That makes it a little bit frustrating because you think about making money or developing a product. You usually think about larger volumes. But no, you can grow them and harvest in small quantities. It's usually a small scale processing, something you can do at home. You can sort, grade, dry, do many different activities at home. Processing can take place at home. Sometimes they're sold as raw materials, but other times they're sold value added. And I'll show you a couple examples of that in a few moments. What's important to non-timber forest products is many of them are consumed at home. They're sold just locally at a farmer's market or on the roadside. But they're really important to local communities because they add nutrition, they add income, and this really engages people with the forest land around them, collecting and harvesting non-timber forest products. Well, let's take a few minutes and talk a little bit about what are some of the product types. And we developed this grouping several years ago because we felt like, well, it's much easier to explain if you group the products together. There are several ways of grouping together, but this is one way that we just liked it, and we've added to it number 5. Ecosystem or personal services. We'll talk about each one of these. The first one is edible forest products, and then we'll talk about a few others that of each of these categories that will help explain what these products are, but also maybe pique your interest and show you maybe, well, there's something close by or something on my land I can harvest. So the edible products are probably the most easily separated. These are the things you collect in the forest that you can be usually used at home or be sold locally. Many times I know when I was growing up, when my mother would send us into the forest around the edges of the forest, like berries, all sorts of things to eat, mushrooms, things like that. I'll show you some examples in just a minute. There's a lot of food produced in the forest, but much of it doesn't get into the market. A lot of it's used locally or at home. But there's a wide variety of products and seasons. So you can collect food items, not all year round, but pretty close to all year round. You know, there's the berries and the plants that you collect earlier in the year, and later in the year, of course, you have nuts and other products. So there's a wide range of products and seasons, okay? And some of the ones you might be familiar with is fiddlehead ferns. They're actually collected by local people and sold to grocery chains up north. And people go to the grocery store and buy fiddlehead ferns. They're collected locally and by people, and they sell them in a grocery store. That's pretty interesting with the greens and everything else. Wild garlic, ramps. Some of you collected ramps, I'm sure. Herbs, spices, berries, fruits, nuts. There's a wide range of food products in the forest. You know, the one that we're most familiar with is maple syrup, of course. It's sold in now many value-added products, maple infused syrups, also maple sugar, things like that are sold. So it's something you're very familiar with. And black walnuts are collected. There's a big industry, black walnut industry, a little bit further to the west, in places like Indiana, Illinois, Missouri. Millions of pounds are collected every year. They're collected in this region as well. They're used for the nuts, but also the shells are useful. There are industrial uses for the shells. So once the nut is picked out, and then they can use the shell, grind it up, and of course the sap is used now for syrup, making syrup. And there's a medicinal value of black walnuts. So that's something that's very interesting. The outside coating of the nut is used to make what we call black walnut tea, and it's great. It's a great way of healing cuts and I think bruises, but I've used it, and it has a lot of tannic acid in it. Anyway, it's called black walnut tea. Black walnuts, very big in our area. I think in Virginia, over half the counties have black walnuts in fairly large stands and throughout the state, most of the state. Another one you're familiar with, I'm sure, is mushrooms. These pictures I took at the U Mountain Center. I was there last year on a tour, and you know, it's fascinating. Mushrooms are a little tedious, but they're anybody can do it. You know, I've done it, and it's not hard. It's just a little bit tedious and labor intensive. So these are logs here cut in the forest here. These are native logs and inoculated with mushrooms, and can be quite lucrative. We have mushroom producers in our local area near where I live, and the farmers do pretty well. They got to manage them. They got to be it's time consuming and labor intensive, but they do pretty well making them. You know, a whole variety of mushrooms. One of the 25 commercial species. Got to be careful. They're perishable, but mushrooms are I mean, I think there's a rising awareness of mushrooms and a rising appreciation for mushrooms. I see more and more mushrooms farmers markets now when I tour around. So mushrooms are important, and they're a great recreation too. This is my buddy Roy, a retired faculty member, and he and I went looking for morels 2 years ago. We found 35 of them in the afternoon. We felt like we really had a good afternoon, lots of walking, lots of great catch up with him. So it's a recreational aspect of mushroom collecting that's important to many people. Got to be careful what you collect, and you got to be careful where you collect it, and you have to be mindful of sustainability and making sure there's enough left in the forest to help supply next year's mushrooms. The next one is ramps. You've heard of ramps. If you haven't, you probably had them. You may have had them, but ramps are very popular in some parts of our region. They really foster a community aspect. This is a sign from a local ramp festival. There are some, they're like maple festivals. There's just a few of them around, but they bring in a lot of tourists. They're very important to local livelihoods. There are many of them out. There's quite a bit in some of the forests in this region. But you have to be careful, like with the mushrooms, the wild mushrooms, you have to be careful about leaving enough in the forest to foster the next generation. Here's a picture here, not too far from Blacksburg, and quite a field of ramps. And obviously they're doing a good job of just harvesting patches, not all across. The second major area is medicinal and dietary supplements. These are plants that have therapeutic values. Several of them you've heard of, and there's a wide range of plants in this category. Some are used for drugs, and they're collected and sold to consolidators. There are consolidators, every 30 or 40 miles, there's a consolidator who will buy these products. You don't have to make them into medicine. Somebody else will buy them in bulk and then process them into medicine. Dietary supplements, I mean, you may not be able to use ginkgo and some of these others yourself, but if you sell them into the market, somebody will take them and process them. These grow very well with natural timber or in agroforestry. In fact, some of these plants, quite a few of them are used in more of an agricultural setting in raised beds. And it's a very interesting group of plants. A bit more complicated than some of the other plants like ramps and things like that, because there's different cultural things you have to follow to grow them, to produce them. But it can be very lucrative and very compatible with your stand. There are some local markets, but most of what I said earlier, they go to regional buyers or to consolidators, huge markets. We see them usually back into the marketplace, health food stores, or even in convenience stores. You can buy some of these products. After they've been processed and packaged, they come back to our area. We've been doing some work at Virginia Tech over the years on tracing where the markets are and how local producers like you and me could produce and then sell into the market. And they're not complicated, these market chains, but it is good to understand a little bit more about them. So no matter what non-timber forest products you might choose to produce, it is good to know a little bit about the market. And we can share some of our stories about markets with you if you need that, to get you started in analyzing it. And some of the common medicinal plants of goldenseal, most of us have heard or seen goldenseal. Ginseng, a very popular plant, a little bit risky because there's a lot of poaching going on for ginseng, but ginseng's important, very important here. Slippery elm bark, some of you have probably used that, and blue cohosh, bloodroot, there's dozens of them. Most of them are native to this region. They grow well here. They grow well in the understory. There are varieties that grow more in an open, but for the most part, they grow in the shade or in the understory. Ginseng is the one that most people hear about. It is in the wild, but it's over harvested in many areas. You can cultivate it in what we call wild simulated. That's planting it, enriching the forest with planting. They also plant it under artificial shade. Huge export markets, China and places like that. I have pictures of large plants that large batches that go to China. They sort them there, and they have over 60 products that they make from ginseng. Then some of it's processed and comes back here. Some of it goes to Korea. Some of it's grown in Korea and then sent here. There's a big market here for ginseng. And here it is here. Here's ginseng, a small ginseng plant. This is in my little patch. I won't tell you where it is. No, it's okay. I'll show you sometime. But we're near Blacksburg, and pretty good climate for these plants. And that's goldenseal on the outside and ginseng in the middle. It's fairly easy to grow. You just got to watch it and take care of it. It takes about 8 years to grow a ginseng plant, and not so long for goldenseal. So there is a time factor. Some of these plants take a while to grow. There's a local digger. This was, the landscape is full of plants, and this one has ferns and others, but he's digging in this region. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these plants materials go into a larger market. They go to consolidators, and then they're processed and packaged, and then they come back to our area. And these were all products that were bought in Blacksburg over the years, and we kept the packages in the containers to show you some of the examples. Ginseng is obviously big, but echinacea, you've heard of that. St. John's wort. There are dozens of plants that, and then dozens of products. And we don't expect to make products like this, to package them, to make them pills or other products, but we do sell to, in this area, we sell to consolidators. Slippery elm bark, this is probably, I don't know, probably a pound of bark. And it's sold, and then companies like Thayer's make throat lozenges from it. So there's a lot that we have in this region that's in demand, at least in the region, throughout the region, but certainly throughout the country. The third major area is floral and decorative products. I mean, these are things that you like to have around your home, or they're seasonal, they're decorative. They're usually made from plants or plant parts. They can be, you can make them, fashion them into wreaths or other usable items at home, which would add value to them for you, or you can sell them in bulk to a store or consolidator. I once visited a store outside Abington in Virginia, and they were buying grapevines. They use grapevines to make wreaths. Maybe you've seen these wreaths, and they had hundreds of wreaths and tons of grapevines that they had bought, and they're making products from them. So that would be a store that you could sell your grapevines to if you had grapevines. Anyway, I'm not telling you to sell grapevines. I'm just saying that's what happens. So all of these products are sold locally. And one of the ones that we all see seasonally is coming up to Christmas. We see greenery, garlands and roping and wreaths and trees, of course. There's seasonal decorative products made from greenery. In fact, some of them are used. What they do is they trim Christmas trees, and they keep the trimmings and make decorative products out, swags and wreaths. Here's an example here. It's actually from North Carolina, but balsam fir and others, very popular. We don't get a lot of people going out and collecting in the forest, but they do collect in some areas. They go out in the forest and collect cuttings from branches. Could be dried flowers. There's just a number of things that can be used for decorative products. If you look around, if you're looking for them, you'll see some, I'm sure, here locally or over the internet. And here's a local producer in Blacksburg. He just every winter he gets out his old truck and brings it to town full of trees, and he's been making roping and swags, and he even sells live trees as well. Again, pretty simple market chains, not very complicated, but you do have to get out and figure out where these products might go. Once you've selected a product, you figure out where they might go, who needs them, and how they should be packaged or sorted or dried or whatever the requirements are in the marketplace. The fourth area is, remember I said we weren't worried about the bole of the tree tonight. We're going to look at special products made from, so byproducts, okay? Might not be the bole of the tree, but it'd be a tree that might have a knot or another distinguished feature, or might be a tree of special species. I was doing research on non-timber forest products a number of years ago in Southwest Virginia, and I went to the library and I asked, where do they make things around here from forest? And well, there's a guy here, he does carving. And I said, where is he? In what part of town? He said, no, he's right here in the library. And he took out his stuff and displayed it in the library. And he had a number of things in the trunk of his car that he had carved from a basswood tree. So it could be from a special species, but it could be from burls or twigs, or it could be any number of things from the forest. The handicraft industry is huge, and every time I show a slide and I put a number on there, I know it's wrong. It's under what the actual thing is, but it's probably well over $1 billion a year. So keep that in mind. There might be a burl in a tree or some special species. This man carved this and some other carvings out of a basswood tree that had fallen down. So you have to be opportunistic in this side, and you have to have an knack or tools for making some wood products.
Tom, this might be a good time. We do have a question in the chat box about expanding more on those specialty products and species that you just spoke of. Wondering about cedar, which at times can tend to take over and be more in the classification of invasive. So how can we capitalize on them?
Well, cedars, oftentimes you see cedar coming into a field they've stopped farming or stopped grazing. And it like you said, it's invasive. But the cedar, I've worked with a couple of cedar companies, and they're making small boxes, making small pieces of furniture, sometimes one of a kind from cedar trees. There are also some byproducts from the needles that I don't know much about the market for them, but I have heard that you can extract from. So you've got to have a fairly large volume, but once you cut the tree down, there are markets for them. They're limited, but there are markets for those cedar trees. They're small trees. They're very limby. That's the downside. They could be used for fence posts because they're very durable, which I guess would be considered a specialty wood product, but they're not. The markets are not widespread. The best thing to do is go to the Division of Forestry and find out if there's anybody buying cedar in your state or in your area, and they usually have a directory of those companies, and find out from that company what type trees they want to buy, what size, and then they might know what to do with the limbs. The last thing you do is you can chop up the limbs and use them for mulch. They're very durable, so they'll be around quite a bit. So if you got enough limbs, you can certainly run them through a chipper and use them for mulch. So there are some products you can make from cinnamon. Does that answer the question, you think?
Sure, and yes, I believe it does, Tom. And we also had someone chime in that aromatic aromatic cedar in closets. I was also thinking about animal shavings, those kinds of things.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a fairly large business, not close to Blacksburg, but in other parts of Virginia where they have a lot of horses, where they use the shavings for horse bedding. And you've got to remember that cedar is very durable, but it also repels insects. So they have lined, they're small enough boards that you need a lot of them, but you'd line closets and things like that with these cedar boards. And that's good for keeping woolens and other clothing. Good question.
Well, and I would like to chime in and say, Tom, you used the term invasive. And I would like to make a rebuttal on the use of that particular word in this case, because it's actually a native plant species. It's
It is, yeah.
aggressive in the landscape, and it is destructive to field conditions, but it
Right.
is not an invasive
No,
species.
it isn't. I
No,
used it only,
and Sarah, to
only
be
because
fair,
Cindy
that
used
was
it.
my word.
That was Cindy's word.
Yeah, now aggressive is better, like it.
I was careful to say that they settle in the fields after they've stopped using them, but you're right, it's a native species. And all the species we're talking about are native. That's the key here. These are trees and plants that naturally occur in this region. And the other point that we didn't dwell on, you know, balsam fir, we don't have much balsam fir here except if it's planted. But balsam fir and other species are used in aromatic, and that's a very good example of a non-timber forest product. People dry them and bundle them in small cotton bags, and they're used as air freshener and other uses. So the cedar would probably be a good thing there. They're not so good for Christmas trees. They're a little bit sharp pointed, the needles, but you can use them for aromatic purposes. Good point, Sarah. These are not invasive species. These are native species. So baskets is one I'd like to talk about. I mentioned earlier, baskets, there are dozens of designs that are traditional to this region. The old baskets, many of them are made with oak. Newer baskets are made with imported materials, you know, vines and whatnot from Asia. But the designs have remained the same for the most part. And so you can still find the old designs. And then some of the handles and whatnot are also made locally. So it's still a good example. What's nice about baskets is it offers an off-season income. So you can make baskets and sell them into a handicraft market. There's a big exhibit of baskets here in Blacksburg at the Art Museum. It's fascinating, the number of materials that can be used to make baskets. One of my favorites is unique furniture. You know, it's made from waste wood or other bits and pieces that you find. And this chair I found it at an arts and crafts store in Abington many years ago, and I just thought it was indicative of what we're talking about. Just being clever. If you're into building furniture, you can find unique pieces of wood. They're usually waste wood, and you can make some very interesting, one of a kind pieces of furniture. We have a producer in Floyd County, Virginia, south of Blacksburg, or east of Blacksburg, that makes almost all they do is make wooden spoons, and they're making wooden spoons from, you know, wood waste and utilizing that. So it's not really from the bole of the tree. It might be from limbs or small pieces of wood. So wood carving and wood furniture is another thing. It's good seasonal income for. Again, we've done some work on tracing this, and one of the things we found is that one of the indigenous pieces of one of our historic things of this region of the world is music. And the music that's found here was possible because we have certain wood species that are useful in making instruments. So one of my students traced this, the making of wooden musical instruments, you know, violin and guitar and cello. And it's fascinating, the species they're using and where they come from. And this area has quite a bit of indigenous instrument making here, been going on for generations. And so that would be a specialty wood product, one of a kind in some cases, but in many cases, small scale for sure. And we track the music instrument group, small group, and you know, it's a good reflection of non-timber forest products. Your inventory, you have to be conscious of where you're going to get your inventory, your resources. Okay, in this case, it'd be timber or wood. You want to identify potential products and look for, and to talk about these again, I'm sure, in just a few minutes. You want to determine how much work or how much time it takes, and you need to understand the costs. Okay, so it's pretty easy to say, well, this is a unique tree, or I can make this instrument, but you got to make sure you have a market. You got to make sure you understand what it's going to cost to make it, the time and the logistics of it. And then you want to determine where you're going to sell it. Okay, so this is a little warm up for my discussion a little bit later on challenges. It's important. So a couple more examples, and then we'll go into some of the opportunities, and hopefully have some discussion. One producer in Floyd makes cutting boards, and they make it from scrap wood. They're quite colorful and very, very useful, and they're not very expensive. You know, this was taken several years ago, but they're using wood waste, and they can use their small pieces of wood waste from their furniture shop. Again, the carvings I was talking about, turnings, utensils. The key thing is they use lesser used species and wood waste. I think that's a key thing. Basswood is a favorite among many of them because it's soft and easy to carve. One of the products that I've worked with is charcoal. We do have some charcoal industry. We have one in West Virginia and a couple in the region, a couple others. But we devised this kiln to cook, to prepare charcoal from wood waste. So on the right, you see the kiln. It's just really, it was my idea. I just built it from a grain storage. And then the charcoal you see on the left. So there are lots of ways. You just got to be a little clever and a little thoughtful, and certainly have a little bit of vision. There's lots of things you can do. You don't have to grow plants. In many cases, you can do things right off your landscape to produce viable products that supplement your income and certainly help you manage the resources that you have. The last major area is this sort of area of ecosystem services or services. And these are forest values that, or products that are not tangible, okay? I mentioned earlier about recreational mushroom hunting is a big recreation area, recreational activity in many areas. Ecotourism or agritourism. One of the examples that I always point to is the Highland County Maple Festival, but you have festivals and other activities close to you that you could probably name. Education, just I take my students on field trips, but also there's other aspects of it. Culture and the history of forest use. That's a non-timber forest products, but forests in general, landscapes in general, really lend themselves to getting people out and getting them educated. We have fostered several demonstration areas. We've got signs made and visitors and tours and school groups and things like that. A new and emerging area is carbon sequestration and the value of keeping your landscape vegetated, green. Is very important. So that'll help a lot with mitigating climate change through carbon sequestration. So we've added services to the mix of non-timber forest products. I quite often call them non-timber values now because it's really broader than just tangible products. And these ecosystem services I mentioned earlier, biodiversity is really important. I also mentioned, I think earlier, watershed, very important. So these healthy forests with a good understory help assure the adequate supplies of quality water. The forest is a very important source of recharge for the aquifer. And it's a new one that we've been hearing about recently is forest bathing, getting people out in the forest to appreciate the landscape and fresh air. So there's a lot going on in the services side, and you should consider this along with the tangible non-timber forest products as a way to add value, add income, add use for your landscape. Internationally, food, fresh water, fuel, fiber, there's a lot of environmental goods that come from the forest. This is an international set of my classes. It's just, it's wide open, these services, and carbon adds that. And the water cycle you've, I'm sure, seen this, you know, you got to have the landscape covered with vegetation to keep it healthy, but also make sure you're slowing down the water going down those slopes. And we have plenty of mountains and hillsides that are eroding. We need to cover those slopes with and non-timber forest products. One of the benefits is this service. Okay. So this slide might be a little out of order because I wanted to talk to you a little about where you might want to go for advice and assistance. But I want to stop here and see if there are any more questions. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. And we're getting close to our hour.
Tom, I don't, yeah, we've got a couple of comments about folks that are adding some additional, they're starting to think beyond the box for you.
Good.
We've got one gentleman, John, talks about making turning pens from local and exotic woods.
Right.
One talks about charcoal is a fantastic way to get rid of, and we've decided that invasive species is going to be replaced by aggressive species, which,
all right. I like
thank
that.
you. That was great
like
for
that.
someone who, yeah, the vernacular is good.
Well,
But then we do,
I'll go circle back and say, actually, getting rid of invasives, the autumn olive, the ailanthus, and actually the princess tree. That's one that is used in Japanese woodworking. So harvesting invasive species for things like charcoal or woodworking is actually really great way to literally get rid of those actual invasives. I just
Right.
wanted to say that eastern red cedar or aromatic cedar is a native plant species and has value in the native ecosystem.
Yep.
We just don't want it in our fields and fence rows because it doesn't benefit the farmer that way.
That's right.
gotcha.
Yeah. I like your.
Tom, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cindy. You got a question.
Nope, I was going on to the question, but please go ahead and finish that thought.
No, I think the ailanthus story is very interesting because there's a big market for ailanthus in Japan. And I know a sawmill operator in Virginia. He used to go around and buy one or two trees here and there and put them all together in a container and sell them to Japan. They like that wood for their temples and churches furniture. Anyway, very highly desirable. So one person's bane is another one's pleasure, I guess. Anyway, go ahead.
There you go. I'll also go ahead and kind of along the agritourism, more consumer-based products, the recent interest in grilling and using flavored wood products for smoking.
Yes.
Is also a huge market. But back to our question, this is from Nicole, and she asked, where do you see the role of permaculture regarding this topic, as well as, quote, regenerative, everything not just in animals? Ramps are being over-harvested, but few people talk of the importance of letting nature take its course and regenerate.
Well, let's address the permaculture first. To me, permaculture does play a role in this. What we're seeing is people growing plants to sell, which I think should qualify that as long as it's in the understory. And I visited a large nursery in West Virginia recently, and all their plants were underneath trees. They were regenerating native species. It was a native species nursery, and selling them to landowners to plant on their lands. So, and I think that might be a vision for permaculture. The regenerative side, I think, that's quite a nice synergy, I guess you might say, with non-timber forest products. Because we're really talking about, and as Sarah mentioned, really talking about native species and how to get them back in the landscape. But more importantly, the social side is to raise awareness about these species and what they can do for the landscape, but also what they can do if you manage them. Managing means harvesting sensibly or using conservation techniques. Then you can provide income, nutrition, and it's great for the landscape. So it is really regenerative. I think that those are two really good points. Thank you.
So another follow-up from Nicole, and Nicole, please chime in if I don't read this correctly for your question. What about a Fourseason CSA? And I think we're talking about in reference to our NTFs, maple, herbs and flowers, cuttings, mushrooms, inoculations, mulch, biochar, and education about identifying herbs, plants, trees, seedlings, and seeds, etc. I think that whole idea of creating a CSA around NTFPs, and also that whole idea of looking at it in terms of how you can do it as a whole forest concept.
Right. I think that's an excellent idea. Well, it's really important because it's a systems approach, not just planting ginseng or one single crop. You're developing systems, and I like the idea of year-round. I try and sell non-timber forest products as being a year-round activity. And if you do research with the traditions in this region, you'll see that it really these products they're seasonal, but all of them together is a system, all year round system. And I jotted down a few notes on that. Cindy, let's make sure we keep that, because that's a great model. The biochar, there's no waste in that model. It's all going to be regenerative, as Nicole said earlier, and it's going to be really a great example of a systems approach to non-timber forest products. There might be another question. It looks like the chat's got another question. You want to go ahead and give me that one?
I think it was a follow-up to the previous one. And it talks about that importance of in-person experiences and
Right.
learning on an intimate level, which is all about the education and the agritourism, and how it used to be the agritourism was defined by having a window so they could see what you were doing. And now the tourism industry, not just agritourism, is looking at that more make and take, touch, feel, have the experience of being able to do something and create something. So this definitely fits into, I think, what you're trying to point out in terms of the experience of agroforestry and agritourism.
Right. It's so important. And I often wonder why are we pushing agritourism and ecotourism so much now? Well, it's so much more important now because our population is rapidly urbanizing. We might not see it personally, but more and more people are living in, a bigger percentage of our population is living in urban areas now than ever before. I'm sure there's been some retreat over the last year or so to rural areas, but even then, those are people that grew up and lived in urban areas, and they're all pretty thirsty or curious about what's going on around them. And if you put a sign out saying, come see the honey being made here, or come see the ginseng growing here, people will stop and look. And I think that's good. That's healthy for our population. Any other questions we need to look at before I move on?
I'm not seeing any, Tom. Anybody?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when I put this, I kind of stuck this in here. I've got a couple more slides I want to show you in a minute, but I stuck this in here because, okay, right at this stage, everybody's probably wondering, where am I going to go to get help? What am I going to do, right? Who's got the answers, right? And I'll give you some more suggestions in a few minutes. But so, right away, I thought, well, there are people in the region that organizations in the region, they might be close to where you can go to or ask, what would grow in my area? What should I try? How can I get mentoring? Where do I get technical information? Where do I get? So these are some of the places that their local and regional offices, organizations, many of them are nonprofit. They get grants to help folks like you and me to try things out. Then there are educational institutions. I work with Future Generations, and we have several programs that help landowners get into non-timber forest products, but also grow their enterprise, their nature-based enterprise. Then we have land grant universities like the one I'm at, Virginia Tech. There's several in the region, and they have people working with them that look at specialty crops. I'd say that for the most part, institutions like that, you need to prod them a little bit and ask questions and push them a little bit, because they've gotten away from, in many cases, these non-timber forest products. When I started the program at Virginia Tech, everybody thought I was crazy. Now we got several programs at Virginia Tech, and we got some more in West Virginia. Things are starting to take off a little bit. And still, there's a real dearth there's real gaps in information and help. And then don't forget the local and state development agencies, agriculture, forestry, and whatnot. Again, push them, ask them questions. What grows in my area? What can I do? Where can I get information? University of Maryland, Ohio State, West Virginia University, and Virginia Tech all have people working in extension. And extension people would be good people to talk to. Let me ask I've got 3 or 4 more slides, and just bear with me for a second, and we'll get through them, and we'll have some more questions. Of course, you could go to the internet and find a lot of information, but I caution you, because the validity of the information, some of the information is not very good. A local library will be good, and there'll be people there who can help you find information. I mentioned earlier the State Department of Forestry. That's important, or the Cooperative Extension, Economic Development Agencies. There are many, many others. And just think about who in your area might help landowners, and then push them a little bit to see what information they might have. And then get in touch with one of us, one of the panel here, Cindy, myself, Sarah, and we'll be able to help you out. Here are some strategies to consider. So you're wondering how can I get into non-timber forest products? How can I try some of these things? I think one of my first recommendations is go to a workshop, get some hands-on exposure or training, right? The other thing is you might go to a couple of those organizations that I mentioned earlier and get engaged on the ground, visit demonstration sites, go to a nursery. It's actually fun because you learn a lot, and these people that do it, they're passionate about what they're doing. You could network or join a landowner association. There's a new one, it's fairly new, it's been about 3 or 4 years, Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition. There's several others that they're really focusing on forest farming. They're really focusing on what we can do in our landscape amongst the trees, around the trees, under the trees. We're working at Future Generations with trying to raise awareness with service providers on non-timber forest products, the subject we've been talking about for the last hour. There are several out there, agriculture and forestry you can talk to. And I'm a big proponent of going to the market and find out where and how people sell non-timber forest products. So you have an interest in greenery, go to, next time in the season, go around and talk to 2 or 3 greenery people. What do they do? Where do they get their greens from? That's very important. It's sort of informal market research, but it'll give you some idea of what you need to do to get into that business. Again, to tamarack, and they have people there making baskets or doing other trades. It may not be the day that you choose to be there, but you can learn from institutions like Tamarack, because each one of these baskets has a label on it with someone who made that basket, and there are courses available, and there are craftsmen around that you can interview. Remember the marketing channels I talked about earlier? See if you can figure out what happens if you make something at your town or your farm, on your land, where it goes, and what are the different steps involved, and what has to happen to the product before it gets to a consumer. Those are very important things to do, because then you understand the changes that are made in the product, but also the value, how it's changed. We're working with Lower Fork sapsuckers. I mentioned them earlier, to set up a study and outreach area. And they've they've got non-timber forest products growing there, but they also have a bunch of other activities. I was successful in getting a VDAX, Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services specialty grant, and we helped them set up some demonstration areas in Highland County, but there's several others around. So visit and on the ground some NTFP producers, some examples. Okay, there are lots of challenges. That's not automatic that you're going to be successful at it right away. There's a lack of NTF information and expertise. I mean, we're working on that, several projects. There's sometimes there's a problem with getting labor, some of this off-season labor that we talked about. You need to make sure to match your resources with the markets. So you got to be sure you can supply the market. That's basic marketing skills are important. Just to understand the market would be important. We have to remember that many of these are niche products. They're not commonly known or commonly sold. So you have to be mindful of that. And that takes a little bit of at least perseverance, a little patience to move them into the market. And some of the products that you might choose to do are valued by others. And I took this at U Mountain Center because Will is the manager there. He's having a tough time sometimes with poachers coming in. So you have to be mindful of the environment where you are and what you can do and what you can't. You know, there are lots of stories about setting up security lights and things like that. I wouldn't suggest that. I would suggest going into something that you can manage, and it's something that you really feel capable of doing. There's a little bit of information out there. This is from North Carolina. This is all the things you can make from the forest. But I'd say it's limited attention by the forestry community to these products. This is one that a flyer. There's work being done on that now to supply information. We have the internet and we've got a lot of other vehicles now. Again, I showed this earlier, the intercropping with non-timber forest products in the sugar bush, we think has got great potential. It's something you should consider, and just have to be patient and find what products you want to produce, what crops you want to grow, and how you want to grow them. Okay. So review here, our last summary here is the NTFPs in your sugar bush can be an important income source, can also serve as income in alternative seasons when you're not making maple syrup. They can provide important nutritional sources, food for your family, for your community. They can continue, I think this is important, they continue a regional tradition of growing and producing products from these plants, mostly plants. It fosters good land management, very good for erosion control and biodiversity conservation. For the most part, it's planting and utilizing the understory in your sugar maple stand. So many of these plants, like the botanicals that I mentioned earlier, we've grown and in the winter they'd be gone, and you do your part with maple syrup, and they'll come back up in the spring. So they're very compatible with maple syrup, and they're very good from a standpoint of there'd be the seasonal use of your land. We have this Reading the Woods program I talked about earlier, and we're trying to raise awareness with service providers and create a planning tool for service providers to help landowners get into or expand their non-timber forest products production. So stay tuned. We'll talk more about that in subsequent webinars, I'm sure. Oops. But we've got other projects. This one's sharing success and projects that were associated with our team, and they're all going to develop examples for you to try on your land. I think we have time for some more questions, I guess. Looks like there's a couple more in the chat.
Tom, I don't think there were questions. Someone had to leave early and appreciated this presentation. And so I told them that if they had any additional questions to get a hold of you or Sarah.
Thank
So,
you.
Other than that, I don't see any. Has anybody got any questions for the Q&A or the chat? Tom, if I had a question later on, how would I get a hold of you or Sarah? Oh, wait a minute. We have another thank you. Thank you, John. Yeah, how do I get a hold of you or Sarah to explore
Right.
this opportunity? There we go. Okay.
Well, here's a slide here I prepared just for that. Feel free to contact me. Just make sure you put something in the subject line saying you want more information, and I'll network with the rest of the Future Generations team, and we'll get you hooked up with the help you might need or the information source you might need.
And then
We're
I would
glad-
also wonder, how will I know about any upcoming opportunities or programs in the future? Is this a good time for Lindsay or Sarah to talk about reminding us of the upcoming programs and also anything else? How do I get on a mailing list? How do I know what's going on?
One thing
So-
I'll point,
You can
Go.
email, if you email syrup@future.edu, we can be sure that we get you on mailing lists for events that we are part of, and that you are subscribed to this webinar moving forward. And there'll be, Lindsay's got the schedule probably more accurately than I do, but we've got some really great presenters coming up for the rest of the fall.
good point, Sarah. The next speaker is John Munsell. I think I mentioned him earlier, and he's going to talk about the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition, which he started, and their focus has been recently anyway on forest botanicals. And they've had some workshops, and they're going to have some more this fall. I talked to John yesterday about it. They're going to two or three workshops coming up this fall. So we had a very good forest farming field day back in May, and they're going to have other events as well. So
Tom, you talked a lot about this Reading the Woods program, and you talked about how it was for service providers that may be working with folks in the agroforestry industry. Is there any opportunity in that program for either input or participation for me as a landowner?
yes, definitely. We're looking for landowners. The program is set up to develop a tool to help service providers mentor landowners. And we're looking for landowners to be part of that first go around. We're going to test this instrument, this tool out. And then the system, and what we're looking for is landowners that are interested in or have land that has non-timber resources on it that you'd like to develop. It takes a commitment by the landowner and also a commitment by the service provider to make this work. But essentially what we're going to try and do in the state of West Virginia is establish a cadre, a group of successful service providers and successful landowners, participants. And yeah, I think if you get in touch with us, we'll definitely, this program is right here. It's a 3-year program. We just started, and we're going to have a draft plan for the service providers, and then we'll start workshops, and then we'll have mentoring after that. So stay tuned. It's a good one, I think, especially for the state of West Virginia. We will include some people from outside West Virginia, especially demonstration sites, and we'll also be a source of information for people outside West Virginia that want to participate. Good question, Cindy.
So I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm going to let you and Lindsay and Sarah wrap it up. Thank you.
Okay. Lindsay, I'll go back to that earlier slide if you want. which talks about our next webinar. I have it right here. Hold on a second, sorry.
That'd be, that'd be
Everybody
great.
gets to see everything in backwards, sorry. This is the upcoming seminars, webinars. What else, Lindsay, do we need to mention?
We have these webinars that are upcoming. We can get the schedule emailed out to the participants today if you guys would all like that.
I'm also going to lie and tell you that we have one question that came in last second here that wanted to know what type of acreage you're looking for the Reading of the Woods program. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah answered your question. There you go. So go ahead and get a hold. The answer to it is in terms of acreage and other specific questions to the Reading of the Woods program, go ahead and reach out to Sarah or Tom, and they will be able to discuss the specifics. And the answer is, I don't know, we're looking for all sizes. We want to be inclusive in this and look at it from all perspectives.
Well, case in point, one of the demonstration areas would probably be less than 2 acres. And another demonstration would be 500 or 600 acres. And so those are 2 participants in our program, potential participants. And there's a range in between. So I think any size will be fine. I don't think we want an urban or town setting. It could most likely would be something outside, but I don't think we have a small size in mind. Thank you very much for your participation, and we got several questions and several good points. Lindsay, you can go ahead and shut down. I've finished what I wanted to talk about.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on September 16th. Have a great evening.
Is the recording going to be available, do you think?
Yes, I have it recording.
Okay, that's
And
good.
we will
All
get
right.
it uploaded to YouTube in the next couple days.
No problem. Just curious. And you'll have, Lindsay, you'll probably have the chat, so I can go back and look at it later.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you,
Thank
Cindy.
you.